Hello, Julie here and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today I'm going to be making a set of 3 Christmas cards using some navy and gold papers. I'm going to be using Kaisercraft's Starry Night, one paper called Striking, and First Noel, 3 papers from there, one called Calm, one called Starry and one called Evergreen. The card bases will all be made from Kaisercraft cardstock in the colour of Dove. My card bases are 5 1/4 inches square, so I cut a piece of cardstock that's 10 1/2 by 5 1/4 and score that in the middle at 5 1/4 and fold it over. Now, one of these cards is a Z fold card and I'll give you the measurements for that, but the finished card still ends up to be 5 1/4 by 5 1/4. To start my first card, I've got my card base and I found a piece of gold cardstock in my stash that went fairly well. Actually, it matched just about perfectly the pattern paper I planned on using on the front of this card. So I cut that to 5 inches square. Then I cut a piece of the Starry Night striking paper to 4 3/4 inches square. Because I didn't have a lot of that gold cardstock and I wanted to make sure I had some if I wanted to use it somewhere else on the card, I cut a 1/2 inch frame from it. So I cut the middle out of it, just leaving a 1/2 inch frame. To create my focal point for this card, I'm going to use my Versafine Onyx Black ink and stamp onto some of the First Noel Evergreen paper and use my Heartfelt Creations Sparkling Poinsettia stamps. There are 4 stamps in this set, or there's more than that, but there are 4 layers to the flower, so I'm going to stamp with that ink and then use clear embossing powder on the top and heat emboss each one of those 4 layers. When I finished that, I used my little Cutterbee scissors and fussy cut each of those flowers. I use my flower shaping tool just to give the petals a little bit of a lift. I'm not looking for a great deal of depth here, just something to lift them up from the card, just a fraction. So I do that from the top. Then I use some art glitter glue to attach each layer on top of the other, staggering the petals so that they are offset. For a little bit of colour on the centre of my poinsettia, I'm going to use the scrapbook.com pops of colour in one that's called Glitter Champagne. I'm just going to put 3 dots of that in the centre of the flower and set that aside to dry. Next, I'm going to use my black ink cube and ink around the outside edges of each of these layers, so the stripe and the gold, and then I'm going to use double-sided tape to attach these to the front of my card base. I'm enjoying making some Christmas cards in different colours at the moment, so I made 3 in a mauve, and I'll put a link to that video in the description box below if you'd like to check that video out. I can't remember what range. Oh, was it Kaisercraft paper I used? Oh, that was called Christmas Jewel. Anyway, I'll put the link in the description box if you want to have a look at those. I had a piece of grey cardstock sitting on my desk and it was 1 1/2 inches wide and about 5 1/4 inches. It was 1 1/2 inches deep by 5 1/4 inches wide. So I took that and I ran it through my Big Shot using a Sizzix 3D embossing folder. This one's called Mosaic Gems. So I ran that strip through my Big Shot with that and embossed the strip. Time to think about my greeting. So I'm going to use a computer generated greeting. I can just print out a sheet of different sizes and fonts of Merry Christmas or whatever my greeting happens to be. Print a whole sheet of it and then I've got it available when I want to use it. And I keep them all in that packet with all the others. So I'm going to use one of these. I'm going to trim it down so that there's a very fine white edge around the greeting. Then I'm going to mount that onto some of that gold cardstock that I used for the background of the card. I attached some scrap chipboard to the back of that grey embossed strip just so that when I add it to the card base it's risen up slightly. I wanted to add a little bit more texture to my card front, so I found this gold fine mesh fabric in my stash, and I cut a piece that's about 3 inches by 5 1/4 inches, and I am going to attach that to the card front under that grey strip. It doesn't show up very well in the video here, but in the actual real life you can't even really see it all that strongly, but you can see it's there and you can feel it's there. To attach my poinsettia to my card front, I just use a little bit of this foam tape and attach that on top of that embossed grey strip. The pops of colour wasn't quite dry, and even though I tried very hard not to, I did end up smudging it. I also inked around the edge of my gold card that backs my sentiment and attached that to the front of the card using glue. To give the inside a bit of decoration, I used my Versafine Onyx Black Ink once again and just stamped a couple of the poinsettia flowers in there just so that they sort of overlapped off the edge of the card. So that's our first card for today. So now we're going to do our second card, which is the Z fold card. So I cut one piece of cardstock that's 5 1/4 inches by 10 1/2 inches and another piece that's 5 1/4 inches by 5 3/4 inches. The 5 3/4 inch by 5 1/4 inch piece I score at 5 1/4 inches on the 5 3/4 inch edge, and the other larger piece, of course, I score at 5 1/4 and fold that in half to make a normal card base. So as you can see here, the 5 3/4 inch piece fits inside of the folded card base that is 5 1/4 inches square. We're going to use that flap, that fold that we created, to attach this piece of cardstock to the right hand edge of our card base. To do this, I added glue to the outside edge of the flap so that I made sure that I had it facing the right direction, and then attached that to the edge of the card, making sure that when I closed the card it closed properly and nice and flat. So you have to line it up very straight and very exact. I burnished the edge very well using my bone folder, and then I had my 3-panel Z fold card assembled. Now I'm going to lay my tri-fold card out flat, and I'm going to measure down 1 1/2 inches on the top left hand corner of the card. Then I'm going to use my ruler, in this case 2 rulers, and I'm going to draw from the top right hand corner down to that mark that I just made at the 1 1/2 inch point on the left hand. Once I've got that line, I'm going to use my scissors and just cut along that line to give me the slope on the card. I'm going to use the Starry Night striking paper to cover the 3 panels on this card. I'm going to cut them all 5 1/4 inches wide, and then I'm going to mark them by laying the panel on top, the pattern paper on top of the panel that I want it to go on, and just marking with a pencil where the shape is, and then cut the shape using my trimmer. I'm going to do this for each piece because each piece is different. I'm going to leave a 1/8 of an inch border all the way around my pattern paper. If you choose a pattern paper that's directional, you have to be mindful of which way your pattern is running. So I wanted all of my stripes to be running in the same direction, so I had to make sure that as I went along I made sure that that was happening. I could have cut a 4th piece to go behind the first page and the second page, but I didn't mind that piece of grey in there to break that stripe up. If you've watched any or many of my videos, you'll know that I ink just about everything. I like the definition that inking around the edges of my papers and embellishment gives, and so once again I ink around everything and then use double-sided tape to attach my pattern paper to my card base. So on the back of the first Noel evergreen, that's the one that the white with the gold stars that I make the poinsettia out of, is all of these Christmas trees. So I set about and fussy cut all of the ones that were left on the sheet actually. It took me a while, but it was worth it. Now I'm going to position these on my Z fold card so that they poke above the level of the slope, but not very much above the 5 1/4 inch mark, so that they're going to fit into the envelope nicely without making me have to get a bigger envelope. So I just play around with this until I'm happy with how it looks. There's a mixture of black Christmas trees with white stripes or white dots or various things, and there's quite a few white ones with various patterns on those as well. I do ink the edges of all of these Christmas trees as well before I add them to my card. I add a double layer of Christmas trees to the centre panel so that when you are looking at it with the card closed, you can see the front of Christmas trees, and when you open your card you also see the front of Christmas trees. If you didn't put that extra layer in there, you'd just be looking at the blank page and the tops of the Christmas trees, the backs of the tops of the Christmas trees. So even though I cut out heaps and heaps of Christmas trees, I didn't have enough to finish that off, so I had to cut out a couple more. For the sparkle on my card, because you can't have a Christmas card without sparkle, I used the same scrapbook.com pops of colour in the champagne colour. I just put that in various places on the Christmas trees, and then I had to set that aside to dry. I actually let that dry overnight. One of the papers in the first Noel collection was called Calm, and it had all these sayings on it, so I cut half a sheet of those up, and now I'm going to use one for my sentiment on the front panel of the card. I've matted that on a piece of the grey and then put some scraps of chipboard behind it, and I'm going to use my glue to stick that to the front of my card. And then I've got a few smaller ones that I'm just going to attach flat into the centre panel of the card, just as a little decoration. One says laugh, one says family time, one says be joyful, and the other one is all is bright. I find my reversible tweezers really handy for doing this sort of fiddly work, because you can actually hold the little sticker or the little embellishment and put glue on it without getting it all over your fingers and making a mess of things, and it holds the paper really quite firmly and makes it very easy to position it exactly where you want it. 9 times out of 10 you can get it straight, but not always. If you're me, that is. I wanted to make an area in the card so you could write your personal message. So I cut a piece of the dove 1.5 inches by 5 inches, inked around the edge of it, and then stuck it to the bottom section of that far right panel. I've sort of positioned it so it's between 2 of the gold strips. So there we have our Z fold Christmas card. This is third card now. I wanted a piece of dark navy cardstock, and I didn't have any in this paper range, so I fossicked in my scrap box and I found one that's actually the back of a packaging, I think. So I cut that down to 5 inches square, and then I cut a piece of the first Noel Calm to 4 3/4 inches square. I also cut a piece of the gold card. Well, I had it as an offcut, the gold that I used on the first card. I had a square 4 inches of that, so I'm going to use that on this card as well. I'm going to use my distressing tool now. I'm using a Prima distressing tool, which is discontinued. You can't get them anymore, but Tim Holtz has one. And I'll put a link to everything that I'm using that I can find here. I'll put a link to in the description box below if that's any help to you, but you might have something that you can already use anyway. So I'm distressing the edges of all of the pattern papers there, so the navy, the pattern and the gold. Then I'm going to ink around them with my black ink pad. Once I've got that done, I use double-sided tape to attach each of those layers to my card base. I've cut the branding strips from the pattern papers, and I've also cut some of the plain blue and some of the blue and gold stripe as well. Now I'm going to create a little Christmas tree on the front of my card just by using these strips and cutting them to decreasing sizes as they work their way up to the top of the tree. And the strips are about 3/8 of an inch long, and I cut them 3 1/4, 2 1/2, 2 1/4, 1 7/8, 1 1/2, 1 1/4, 7/8 of an inch, and 1/2 an inch. So I will put these measurements on my blog. So if you want to have a look at the measurements, they will be there. I'll put a link to my blog as well underneath if you want to check it out. So once again, I inked the edges of all of those little strips and then used my reversible tweezers and my art glitter glue to attach those to the front of my card. I also cut a base for my Christmas tree from the navy cardstock and attached that to the card in the same manner. Every Christmas tree has to have a gold star on the top, so I used the same gold cardstock that I've used on my background, and this punch, it is about a 1/2 inch star, and so I've attached a piece of or a foam square to the back of that star, inked around the edge of it, and then attached it to the card front at the top of the tree. I used this die and some white cardstock to make the smallest size bow, and I'm now going to attach that to my little pot or my little stand that my Christmas tree is sitting on, just for a bit more decoration. So for my sentiment for this card, I fossicked through all of those pieces I cut off of that first Noel Calm pattern paper and found one that said Christmas greetings, but it was too big to go across my tree. I didn't want to detract from the tree, so I cut it down and I trimmed the white off of it because it wasn't even once I cut the greeting in half. So I trimmed that off, and I'm going to put that at the top of the gold section on the card, and I'm just going to stick that on there with some liquid glue. So to decorate the inside of this card, I've used some of the Starry Night striking. I've cut a piece that's 1 1/2 inches by 5 inches and attached that to the left-hand edge of the inside back section of the card. Now I'm using Kaisercraft Sparkle stamp set, and I'm just taking 2 of the small Christmas trees from that stamp set and stamping those to the bottom right section of the inside of the card. I'm using my StazOn Jet Black Ink to do that with. So there we have all of my cards for today, 3 navy and gold cards. I hope you've enjoyed watching my video. The idea of using some different colours on Christmas cards is something that I really enjoy doing, and I have, as I said, I've used pink a couple of years ago, and I did an earlier one using mauve, and now this one using navy. I think the next set I make might be the traditional colours, because I do like to include those as well each year. So thank you for watching, and I hope you can join me for my next video.